amazing group of people. I appreciate all of them. I'm taking a big chunk of their Saturday out to come out and present here. And this is a very professional, passionate group of people that are really doing some very great things at the county. So really appreciate that. I wanted to start out just very quickly. Vanessa gave, I think, a very good introduction for those that weren't familiar with the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. And I wanted to just explain very briefly how that segues into some of the planning that we're starting for Pima County. Part of this is influenced by my working for BLM for 30 years and the way BLM does plans. When I got to the county, I thought, reading some of these documents, that just fits in really well. But under the Multi-Species Conservation Plan, which was the plan that was required to get the county's Section 10 permit, there's guidance or requirements through that Section 10 permit that as the county or private developers develop some of the 36,000 acres that are basically available for development projects in the county, that the county, once we mitigate those, set aside some of the 100,000 or so acres of county and flood control land that we have 2 years to develop a plan for how we are going to protect the resources we set aside for mitigation. Those parcels already have, here we go again. Those parcels already have, let me try the other one. Those parcels already have restrictive covenants that were placed on them, but we have to look at avoidance and minimization of some of the activities that the county does on those parcels, even before they're allocated for mitigation. But through this process, of creating these what we call MSCP compliant plans, we have to come up with a series of what were called conservation targets. Now we're calling them resource priorities. And we had to basically come up with goals, objectives, and strategies for those targets. We've now also through the MSCP received guidance that we can look at these larger scale watershed plans and do some of that planning more efficiently. So we are going to be, and have just begun, led by Julia, a plan for the Cienega Corridor. Those of you that were here way back in 2003 remember that we had the missing link when the NCA was designated in the Cienega Corridor. And so now we're going to be doing a county plan to look at how we manage the parcels that the county acquired in that corridor. So more to come on that, but I think it's pretty exciting that we've kind of come full circle. So with that, I'd like to ask, does anyone have a question for the panel? Steve?
I have a question for
and we should, and I
So we can get it on the recording. It's good to have it.
I had a question for Courtney Rose, and this, you didn't touch on it, but I'm curious how your office interacts with Vanessa's program in terms of ranch management when it comes to maintenance and replacement of rangeland improvements, especially in terms of considerations on historical improvements, especially water collection, distribution systems, livestock handling facilities, and fences that either need to be maintained or replaced.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I work very closely with Vanessa's rangeland management program. In fact, we just went out a couple of weeks ago to record a historic building that was falling down together. We work in a way that is pretty pragmatic. Vanessa sends me her list of ranchers' needs and kind of like a projection into the future of maybe 8 months to a year of things that she sees that might be an issue, such as a need for a cattle guard or a road that needs to be fixed because it's been washed out, There are a lot of issues, wildlife drinkers that need to be installed. And so some of the time, if I can get the time, I will go out with Vanessa and I will take a look. If it's on county conservation land, I have an Arizona Antiquities Act permit to do archaeological survey. So I can go out and take a look and see if there are any issues. If it's a small area, if there are not a lot of impacts, it's usually not a problem, and we don't need to do additional archaeological surveys or mitigation. And one thing that we like to do is even if something would be needed in terms of preservation, we can work together in finding a way to avoid the cultural resource so that we don't have to spend as much money as as would otherwise. So we try to work on this right now. It's a case-by-case basis, so every cultural resource is different, as is every project area. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
All right, I have a kind of a big picture question because it's really special to have both ends of the watershed really well represented today. So I want to ask the whole panel, whoever wants to grab it, or whoever's got the mic in their hands, what you guys see as the conservation strategies that look the most different, or where what we would do would be the most different if we're seeing and acting on managing in the watershed as a whole versus in one end of it or the other. Does that make sense as a question? What do we do differently if we're all working together, or if we have this whole watershed to play with?
I think Karen gave one nice example, and that was really thinking about the restoration opportunities collectively and getting the NEPA documents in place that, so the county's not a federal agency, we don't need to go through NEPA, but often the grant funds that support the work are federal, and so therefore we do need to go through NEPA. So that was a very strategic thought to collaborate, on watershed level restoration planning. I think that's a great idea. There are also some things like, again, state trust land reform, or perhaps special legislation to, finish the job of consolidating the state BLM land exchanges that were in the works decades ago, to stabilize the future of the NCA. I feel is like a huge unfinished agenda, and it's not something that the BLM can do. In fact, I think they're prohibited from, any kind of legislative activity, so they have to depend on others. Perspectives.
I might add to what we might do differently, which is, upper and lower the watershed are inherently different. The county has a different mandate as opposed to the BLM. But we can do things in a similar manner. So identify conservation priorities for different ecological sites, for example, because they are different. But take a similar approach in that regard. So
We're losing the battery.
yeah, whether or not it's actually participating in the same NEPA planning process, right, to get to that point where we can apply for the same federal grant funds, or just having a collaborative Santa watershed partnership, essentially, right? So talking about what we're planning to do, how we're planning to do it, even though we're doing it slightly differently because we have different resources on the ground.
What's y'all opinion of introducing beavers into the watershed?
I get in trouble at home.
Okay, watch this. Old BLM had great idea. No, I really think that the beaver could be an excellent tool. I think we've much less water than we did when we first proposed 10 years ago. The reintroduction of beaver into the stream, and I've heard that on the San Pedro River, where beaver reintroduction happened, that the beavers are really starting to wink out over there. Ben, I don't know if that's true, but that's what I had heard. So I don't know how successful it might be, but I think that it is something that's worth a try, to try to create more infiltration of the water, and just see if we have or the ability to really better manage the riparian areas there on the creek. I think the county, putting the county hat on, there are definitely some concerns about the impacts that it could have on vegetation, but I think that what we've seen in other places, it's something we just would need to keep track of. And hopefully, if we're able to improve the conditions even more in the upper part of the watershed by having beaver, then the county part of the river would also get increased water and have that benefit. So I know, Julia, you've thought about this too, so I'll pass it back to you.
That was a weird conversation with myself.
So my concern about beaver would be about the potential impacts on invasive species. We do have bullfrogs in the lower Cienega Preserve. If beaver are introduced to the upper Cienega, they probably will move downstream. They did that on the San Pedro. Ultimately, I agree that they probably wouldn't persist, but they might, and they might have benefits to infiltration. So I'm interested in the experiment, very much interested in the experiment. If there's good monitoring and preparation for management, the work of the Frog Project in the upper watershed presents an amazing opportunity right now to do that, and I hope that the experiment can be run in the upper watershed, closely monitored.
Any other questions?
I actually have two questions. I'll start with one and then see if we have time for the other one. One is for Vanessa. So when you're talking about your request for proposals that you're considering doing for grazing new lessees, I'm assuming that would include Pima County's goals and objectives for how livestock could improve the resource that you have, and not just, that's where a difference would come in with not having just a cost basis. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea with that, and this is just our thought to use an existing tool, but yeah, basically, we would tailor it to our needs. Like, hey, we have this ranch available, it has X and Y lease land, it has this many water improvements, this is working, this is not. Here are the conservation requirements, here are the grazing management requirements. Maybe there'll be some other questions like, are you willing to participate in some sort of beginning rancher program, stuff like that, and providing a background of perhaps experience, or we have to develop what that would look like. But what got me thinking about that was in Boulder County, Colorado, they have a pretty rigorous farm leasing program, and some ranch lands as well, and they use the request for proposal. And so I've been looking at some of those, and there are a couple other county organizations that are using similar formats for that. So in that sense, there wouldn't be, there's the grazing fees involved, but it has yet to be determined if there would be some other fee, but in general, it would be asking for a management plan, basically, and then us choosing which one meets our parameters the best. Does that help? Okay.
Do you have time for one other quick question?
Yeah, we have time for more questions.
This will be for Courtney. Do you ever have any hesitation about putting your cultural site locations out to the public?
Yes.
Okay. I would think so. And how do you handle that?
Actually, actually, I asked that my portion not be recorded. Yes. And we do not put our site locations out to the public. And all of our maps have a non-disclosure quote on it. And this has been, it's been a state law for quite some time. So it's against the law to publish site data. So, for instance, I wouldn't be able to give everyone who's not a permitted archaeologist a handout showing where sites are located. And there really is a big problem with pod hunting and looting and vandalism and people, stealing rock art off of sites, and they're so beautiful, and you want them to just stay protected. And so that is my mission for and using everything we have, the site stewards' passion for protecting the sites. But yeah, we're not. We do not. In fact, when consultants send me an archaeology report, they will send me an agency copy, and nowadays a developer will get the copy that has the site locations redacted. So, thank you for that question.
Karen, since I have the mic, I'd like to offer a point of order. The concept of having the Arizona State Trust lands removed from the watershed of Cienega Creek has come up a couple of times already. And I want to remind you all that the Arizona voters actually approved an amendment to the Arizona Constitution that allows the state land department to do land exchanges. But the limitation was it was tied in with a military protection emphasis to protect military bases, especially in the greater Phoenix area and even Tucson with Luke Air Force Base and Davis-Monthan. And it was only with federal agencies. So military emphasis aside, the BLM was certainly one of those partners that the amendment was directed to. But the worst part of that was the sideboards that were imposed to accomplish that. It dealt with public hearings statewide. It required 2 appraisals and a very expensive application to the land department. And probably the weak link was the approval of the legislature before that could be taken to a vote of the public. So the sideboards were so stringent, the land department tried to staff that with an entity within the state land department, but that did not work out. And so I would say, yes, that authority does exist, but it's up to the land department and the land commissioner to make it happen.
I got one. I really don't need
Can I
mine.
just really quickly ask a follow-up question to your thing of order?
Is Fort Huachuca's, like the Sentinel landscape, would that be considered part of that? Okay, that's what I thought. All right, thank you.
I'm curious about how much Pima County spends on conservation every year. What do you guys think that dollar amount is?
That's hard to listen to. Karen, you want to?
Okay, so what's your budget?
What's in your wallet?
What's in your wallet? It's a hard question to answer because of the way that our budgets come in. There's a lot of things intermixed in there. So even our division budget, which is probably $2.5 million for the natural resources division of parks, is going towards a lot of programs, environmental education being one of them, and other efforts that are not what would specifically be conservation, but definitely are of a benefit to conservation. I don't know what the budget for OSC is, but that probably could be looked at being most entirely going towards conservation and sustainability. Jeff?
So we summarize this as it specifically relates to administration of the county's MSCP on an annual basis, and we spend just over $1 million a year, give or take. It's a pretty fuzzy number, just on administration of the MSCP. So, and that's across 9 different departments.
And so that includes things like administering certain ordinances that predated the MSCP. It includes administering the riparian habitat provisions of the floodplain management ordinance. It includes development services, hillside development code. So there's certain things in there that they have a conservation value to species, but they were existing programs that were independent of the acquisition of the land that we got credit for, basically, as avoidance and minimization measures for species.
And for flood control, just for the open space lands, probably this last fiscal year we spent close to $250,000, and that's just land stewardship projects like fencing and signage and that type of thing. And as far as the flood-prone land acquisition program, I think the funding changes from year to year. I don't have this exact number, but I think it's close to $1 million that they set aside. I might be wrong on that number, but I did look up fiscal year, I think it was 16-17, and they spent about $667,000 on just over 300 acres of land. So that gives you an example. And I know in recent years we've been acquiring even more land, so that number I'm sure has gone up since then.
I'll just add, also as part of the Sonora Desert Conservation Plan, the voter approved bonds from 2005. So we got permission to spend $174 million on the open space land. Many of those saw the map that Vanessa showed. So those were bond monies that then came out of subsequent budgets, and we've done a really good job of paying off those bonds fairly quickly. And I think we're close. I think if we are not already done paying those bonds, we're very close. So that's an important consideration of the bond monies that towards those conservation lands.
Okay, just one more tidbit on the budgetary stuff. For the range program, I have 2 staff that each live on a different ranch, so they're county staff that are living on site, and they either provide range and natural resource liaison services for all of us really, but mainly for the range program, and on-site stewardship of historical buildings, or fixing ranch infrastructure, for example, at the parking ranch. So maintaining just those 2, you could call them ranch headquarters, and providing services so they and their families can live there is a big chunk of the range program budget. But it's more or less about $250,000, give or take. That covers everything, including that.
Thank you. Follow-up question for Vanessa and for everybody, I guess. So I was there at the beginning, and when we were talking about ranch acquisitions in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the idea was to maybe go ahead and take the cattle off of all these lands, and then we quickly realized that wouldn't work because of the leases and the demand for the leases. However, there is some leases around here that have been leased by environmental groups, and I don't know if it's still leased, one down by the Balacomery. Is there any thought about, I'd like to lease one of the ranches, live out there and raise jackrabbits. Is that idea even part of the conversation with Pima County?
In order to keep the state grazing leases active, you have to be running livestock, and that's one main reason. But proper management of livestock grazing and ultimately food production, whether it's direct or indirect, is the goal. So jackrabbits might work for that. We have to talk about that. But the whole goal of ranch conservation isn't just it's not to preserve the land, it's to maintain a working landscape where you can raise food but still protect all of your important natural resources. So that wouldn't be considered unless in a specific case.
Right, thank you.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit, in that I think one of the sort of visionary elements of the SDCP is really seeing that, when you talk about large landscape level conservation, you have to look at who owns the land, what motivates those folks. So the inclusion of the ranch element in the SDCP wasn't sort of an accident, and it wasn't some just sort of lip service to the ranching community, that there was a whole ranch conservation team led by Dr. Sheridan at the U of A. It was that recognition that the largest areas of undeveloped open space were owned and leased by ranchers, and that there was a commitment made to continuing to ranch. Our challenge is always going to be the balance between the natural resource conservation and the ranch impacts, and that's why we have some of the ranch standards and guides that say, yeah, we could run more cows, we could have greater utilization of the grasses, but we want to have a lower utilization rates to try to make that balance happen between the natural resource and the ranch conservation elements.
Thank you. Sheila has a question.
Oh. Is it on? Am I on?
You're on.
I am. Agricultural resources erosion control question for Courtney. Looking at the profiles on the preserve, they're the same profiles you see in the creek, where you have enormous scouring and exposure of deeply buried sites, and yet on the surface you're having the Holocene and alluvial stuff removed. So this has always impressed me as, yes, we can do some stuff on top, but have you also spent any time trying to figure out how to protect those deeply buried sites? Not just from the erosion control activities in a Section 106 way, but in a Section 110 way. What's the big fix for those?
Yeah, and all I can say is that we've just started to look at this, and with Dr. Huckleberry's study on the stratigraphic profiles and finding out how deeply buried these sites are, and we need to find that out first. We know there are very deeply buried sites, but we have not worked on that yet, but we will. We are just starting to.
Yeah, that's a multi-million-dollar answer, I think.
Yeah, and also another aspect that I didn't really touch upon in answer to your question is that we just started collaborating with the tribes, with Tohono Nation, Akchin Indian community, Salt River, Pima, Maricopa, and Gila River Indian community, as well as the Hopi, and we are asking for input on exactly those types of questions. And what I've heard, and this might not be the case for every Indian community or tribe, or it might change depending on the exact situation and exactly what is causing that erosion, but tribal interests may, and I don't want to speak for the tribes, but erosion might be a natural process, and that it's hard to do more damage could be done to cultural materials and trying to change a natural process. So I think it's a case-by-case basis that we wouldn't want a wholesale program to prevent that from occurring unless all of the interested parties thought that was what we should be doing. And plus, like we said, it would be quite an expensive undertaking and grant money. So.
Yep. Thank you.
I have two questions. First is,
Frank.
Okay, I have two questions. First, There seems to be a lot of data in the Cienega Creek watershed, except for Mescal Wash. There's not much of a alert data or USGS data there. Is there a push internally there to try to gather more data in Mescal Wash?
Well, that's a good point, Frank. So Mescal Wash is a pretty big dam and brings in runoff from the flanks of the Rincon Mountains, and then it brings it through some grassland terrain. So it's an important source of sediment as well as water to Cienega Creek, and it does deserve some attention. You know, the flood control district is not unaware of the importance of Mescal Wash, so it's something that we can take a look at in our upcoming management plan about whether or not we need to have a stream gauge there. And there are some sites that, in fact, didn't you evaluate some?
I'm not there anymore. My second question is, what kind of adaptive management strategies do you think are needed to adjust to a climatic variability, especially the fact that it seems we have a current fairly normal winter precipitation, but we have a continued dry winters. With that, what do you have any adaptive management strategies that you're thinking of?
Okay. So one of them by the flood control district happened a long time ago, and that was realizing that El Nino type weather patterns bring the potential for larger flood magnitudes. The flood control district changed the design standards for basically all of the kind of infrastructure, critical infrastructure in the Tucson Basin, and particularly bridges, so that they wouldn't fall down.
I was thinking more of Cienega Creek again. Yeah. I'm sorry, Cienega watershed.
So for Cienega Creek, one of the risks I think that we look at as we think about climate change is, you know, more precipitation, more erosion, potentially bringing a lot more sediment down into the watershed. And it's a little unclear right now as to, you know, does that mean that the channel's actually going to start to fill up? Will the main stem, you know, have proportionate amount of stream power to take that sediment and push it out into the to the built environment, really, and putting infrastructure at risk further downstream. So these are some of the issues, again, that we'll be facing in the management plan.
And I'll put a plug in for riparian vegetation monitoring. So we already have, as we showed, pretty comprehensive surface water flow, groundwater data, and then linking that back to sort of retrospective vegetation analyses to say, okay, here's what we're seeing. We have sediment deposition, we have decreasing groundwater levels, but what's that doing to the structure of the pole in a rigorous manner, not just a visual assessment that we're having some cognitive buyback, for example.
What about use of upstream check dams and to reduce the high velocity flows?
I was going to mention that, yeah. So, you know, in places where we have property and there's smaller channels, we can use what Frank mentioned, the rock structures to help make a more resilient upland plant community that slows and infiltrates water instead of allowing it to run off, and maybe reduce the sediment load from these upland areas. But I think at Cienega Creek, we might be limited by how much we actually own of the upland area. So looking maybe for opportunities to cooperate with private landowners or you know, public landowners in the area.
I think Dan and Linda maybe know what I'm going to say, but with regards to the continued dry, cool seasons, what I'm seeing, even in the higher precip zones, like 12 to 16 inch precip zones on some of the ranches, are sometimes up to 50% die-off of certain native grass plant populations in specific plant communities, and that's in pastures that have been rested for at least 1 year or several years. And in this one site, I'm thinking about some of that grass population did come back. But if we have continued dry winters, those native perennial grasses don't have a chance to last very long, and they don't have a chance to last until summer monsoons arrive. So planning, grazing planning is really key there, and looking at your utilization levels when you can before monsoons come to see where you are, and if you need to take any mitigation measures. But in addition to the upland erosion control management, I would guess you would see more upland erosion because of grasses dying off. But what you might see more of, and what you probably will see more of, is our invasive grass species, or I should say exotic grass species moving in. They can tolerate warmer and drier climates.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and maybe functionally, I mean, we have this big program to suppress invasive grasses, but functionally they are holding some of the soil. So that's another question of where do you put your resources? Where do you do management and where do you not? And be humble and recognizing that nature may be stronger than anything we can muster.
Yeah, maybe following on that, I think I have to realize that where the Scenic Creek Preserve lies within the watershed, right, is really the tailpipe, we like to say, of the whole watershed, and therefore our ability to affect change is really, somewhat quite constrained, I think, in a lot of ways, and that also speaks to the importance of the Scenic Creek Preserve and the other works that are being done along Scenic Creek as a story, as an important sort of engagement point for the community. Not the data that we're collecting isn't just to be used for management decisions, it's also to be used to engage the community. How are the drought impacts occurring and impacting our environment? How do those changes relate to our groundwater replenishment? And that's why we've invested, and that's part of the reason why I think we've invested a lot in the monitoring there, and PEG and Pima County doing engagement, because I think the Scenic Creek Preserve really has important stories to tell about what's happening in our environment. 0 minutes, we're being told. That's pretty, you're done.
Well, I thought we had a few more because I'm giving up my talk this afternoon. But that's up to you, Larry.
Yeah, no, if there's other questions, I think we're still good.
I was going to pick up. I'll just say one other thing, if I could, and it's just kind of it's kind of maybe getting at Gita's question about. We see our role as an important role. Everyone up here sees engagement as part of our role. A lot of us here are sort of scientists and so forth, but engagement and inviting people to come and experience these places. There's other HCPs, habitat conservation plans, whose mitigation lands are locked up. You can't go on there. You can't recreate. You can't experience it. And we want to be able to say also to the community, come and do your agave monitoring on our lands if that's important. Our lands, we want respectful, recreation on our lands, but we realize that the taxpayers paid for these lands, and they should know what they paid for. And B, I think as we talk about with the stories that come out of the data, is that people who go out to the land and they experience these things, experience these particular places. They also, you can't, this is what a lot of us live here, we just love this land. We know these places, and when we hear things happen about places that we love, we want to get involved, we want to have our voices heard, and I think that's one of the great things about working with this community of people at Pima County, is that we're all really driven by engagement, the stories, the come on out and experience what we're doing. So I appreciate everyone's support in that regard.
I wanted to add something on, since I spent a great deal of my career working on adaptive management, that I think there are a lot of opportunities when Pima County, as they said, we've said, is engaging with other entities in the watershed. We set up the Las Ciénegas NCA plan specifically to implement adaptive management, and basically Pima County now, by being part of that environmental assessment for upland restoration, there's a lot of opportunities with the activities that are being proposed in there that can be implemented on more of a larger landscape that I think will have some benefits in terms of just being better prepared for drying conditions. I mean, there's some tough decisions we may have to make in the range program, that we may have some of our ranches, and every entity may have ranches that no longer can support year-round grazing use. They may have to be more ephemeral type use ranches. I mean, long-term, that might be what we're looking at. So it's a matter of trying to build in the flexibility and be prepared, and remembering that adaptive management is about learning. And that's the most important part of it. We get the information, and we try to set things up so we're getting that information, and then we have the ability to adjust to it and learn from it. So I had to add to that. Do we have any other questions? Right. I'm just going to add one really quick question so that everybody can kind of have a last chance. And that is, I think everybody in their presentations talked a lot about partnerships and working with others. So I'd just like to go down the group here and have everybody just, talk about an opportunity that they could see in their program for, the public or other agencies to be involved in, or talk about some of that involvement that's already going on. Because like any agency, entity, Pima County, we do a lot of work with partners. And I spoke about one of those earlier, that when we get into the Cienega Creek corridor planning effort, we'll certainly be looking for input and partnerships from that.
Okay, well, I would say, first of all, this range program is often really overwhelming for me and my staff. And so I couldn't do it alone, but I also couldn't do it without all my team members here, and Karen, and then our team members that aren't here today. And of course, the partnerships we have with organizations such as the Altar Valley Conservation Alliance, Cienega Watershed Partnership, and the multiple other partners that we have in the area. So we can run into some really complicated challenges, I'll say. And I just couldn't do it by myself at all. And usually, I would say, every couple weeks, somebody from our team or our staff are on at least one of the ranches, and I can't get out there as often as I'd like to each one. So I often depend on other staff, and plus the other program and departmental staff as well. And they're really good at reporting back to me what's going on. So if there's an issue, or if there's good things, bad things, whatever's going on, I usually hear about it, and I really value that.
So I've been kind of throwing this idea around with Wendy Burrows with environmental education about creating a program similar to the Cultural Resources Site Steward Program, but for the open space lands, because we have so many issues on these lands, and I just showed a few photos of some of the issues, but it's pretty rampant across the landscape. And so just like currently I'm the sole person heading this program and doing all the work, the inspections, and so it'd be nice to have a program where the public could take ownership. We would open it up and have volunteers come in and inspect an area, whether it's annually or biannually. So that's kind of an idea we're throwing around, and would hopefully get interest from the public to help with that.
So I get involved in a lot of things that are kind of big picture county, federal, state things. So, one of the things that I encourage citizens to do is to get involved in those kind of higher level processes that really make a difference on the land and the water. And the upcoming next year, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality will be renewing its rulemaking on water quality standards, and that's an opportunity for everybody to participate in either bringing new data to the agency that they may not be aware of, or just simply letting them know your values for water quality.
I'd like to work with Marissa on her new idea of stewardship of lands. In fact, we share one state steward in common in Pima Ranch. Yeah, and recently, as you mentioned, site stewards, I've been working more closely with the state steward program and hoping to increase the presence of eyes on the ground who are helping to protect sites.
Yeah, and I also think it helps, it helps the public take ownership of their public lands, you know. If they're out there and they can see the resources, they're going to be more prone to protecting those lands into the future.
I think from the ecological monitoring program perspective, we're situated very interestingly in that we have many different constituencies that we could work with. So we're collecting all this information that is not necessarily designed for adaptive management purposes, but they tell great stories. I know we sent out a video that I recorded in Tucson Mountain Park last year of 2 male tortoises sparring. It got posted on social media, it got shared by a lot of nonprofits in Tucson. The type of thing where we're out and seeing these things. And how do we take the sort of raw data that we're collecting, and then we have requirements to write agency reports. We're working with collaborative groups, with nonprofits. We're sharing with other departments in the county. But then how do we also interface with the public, both the interested public and the potentially interested public? And as Brian was alluding to, sharing those stories I think is a really big part. It's a challenge because it's not necessarily in our sort of daily job duties, but I think it provides also a lot of opportunity for us to do that.
Well, I brought my daughter here today, who's a junior docent at the Desert Museum, and one of the things that I would love to have is sort of a junior, a youth stewardship program, where they take some of the great energy that the youth have, the buffalo grass work that you see some of the youth taking charge of, and really doing that on county land. So having the youth sort of like the Youth Engaged Stewardship, the YES program that's been so successful at La Cienega's conservation area, but also doing that on county lands. That's something I'd love to have and see over time.
Do you have an answer to this question?
All of the above. I think that I might get in trouble if I don't finish this up. So I can talk about partnerships all day long. No, I guess I'll conclude with everything we're doing here with the Cienega Watershed Partnership and the Cienega Watershed is based on partnerships and collaboration. It has been from the very beginning, from the establishment of La Cienega's NCA, all the way up to, as I said, circling back to doing more plans for the Cienega Corridor. All of it's based on collaboration and working together, and I think we should all be very proud of ourselves for what we've accomplished through the years. So I'll conclude with that, and thank you everybody for supporting our panel this morning.
So while the county folks